Rahul Mehrotra is an architect, urbanist, and educator who is the founder principal of RMA Architects and is professor and chair of the Department of Urban Planning and Design at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. Mehrotra has designed projects that range from recycling urban land and master planning in Mumbai to the design of art spaces, boutiques, weekend houses, factories, social institutes, and office buildings across India, engaging diverse issues, multiple constituencies, and varying scales from interior design and architecture to urban design, conservation, and planning. He has also been actively involved in civic and urban affairs in Mumbai, having served on commissions for historic preservation and environmental issues with various neighborhood groups. He was the executive director of the Urban Design Research Institute, where he is now a trustee and has taught at the University of Michigan and at the School of Architecture and Urban Planning, MIT. I now invite Mr. Rahul Mehrotra for his address to the convocating students.
Good evening. Dr. Forbes, Professor Vyas, Professor Katiyar, Governing Council of NID, NID's faculty, parents of students, and most importantly, the new generation of designers who've graduated today, 371 of you. Congratulations again. My warm greetings and wishes and congratulations once again. I think this is an incredible honor for me, but I think addressing you all in this setting, this incredibly beautiful setting, the landscape, the building, the people, is absolutely overwhelming. And so really a heartfelt thanks for the invitation and for this honor to speak to you. I graduated from the School of Architecture at CEPT in Ahmedabad, and being an architect and understanding, I hope, the value of design, I share and can kind of understand the anxiety as well as the excitement that a number of you, all of you, are going through today. Design, and by extension, design thinking, which is being used a lot, I think is needed in the world today more than any time in history. Design as a synthetic force, design as a force that brings things together. It's about reconciling disparate contestations, disparate forces, and the synthesis that design can achieve is incredible. So keep that absolutely in mind. So this idea of the synthetic force, or to use the theorist Herbert Simon's often cited quote, "Everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones, into preferred realities." This potential instrumentality that this education has given you is something you must use for the betterment of society, of our society, of the planet more broadly. Society has invested in you to imagine better life through design. So while this is challenging, it is overwhelming, and it's a great responsibility. How do you balance this aspiration if you did development or societal investment and your survival as young professionals, right? That's the first anxiety that we have to deal with. You've been fortunate to study at NID in this unique education ecology of Ahmedabad, and the legacy that you're part of, having graduated from here, this incredible institution, is mind-blowing. If you think about it, many parts of the world, Asia, Africa, Latin America, what really happened in the 40s and 50s is in these places, aesthetic modernity arrived on these shores before the social modernization process. And so our societies weren't modern, but our aesthetics became modern because of charismatic designers. The incredible role that NID played in this moment was to root it, was to make it our own, was to Indianize it, was to localize it. And the kinds of people that came here through the patronage that this institute got by the families in Ahmedabad was mind-blowing. Charles and Ray Eames. You had people from Finland, your whole textile legacy here, people from around the world. I can't even begin to name them, but also the genius minds of professors here who took on the baton to synthesize modernity, which was something the globe was aspiring to, but to localize it. And this is a legacy you must totally be aware of. You have to be you're privileged to be part of this incredible ecology of education that the city has offered you. And I think with that privilege really comes responsibility. In architecture schools, we were often reminded that as designers, as architects, you can't bury your mistakes. You have to live with them. This truism adds a huge degree of consciousness in what we deploy and implement as our ideas, the forms we make, the spatial allocations we make as architects, what you do as designers to create the messages we convey through communicating our ideas about these preferred realities, about these new imaginations of how society can be better. Naturally, this needs a consciousness that goes beyond the realms of our training and makes us confront the context of our operation. And it's this awareness that you need to cultivate in its broadest sense. So as a first step, it's actually critical to understand who you're working for. Why? Why are you working? Why are you doing what you're doing? And what are you doing as designers for this society? It is absolutely your responsibility to define the context of your work and not take it for granted. We often take context and we take identity as found things. These are found conditions. They're not. They're conditions that you will construct as designers. And that is really the excitement of what you're going to do. Like identity, context, it's continuously evolving and transforming. These are not static and found conditions. You have to make them. It sort of drives me crazy when people say Indian design has lost its identity. That means nothing. Actually, what they're saying is Indian design has changed, and I don't like the way it has changed, right? It's not about something being lost. There's despair in the idea of lost, because identity has to be constructed. And this is what the society has invested in you to do for us as designers, as young designers going out into the world. But identity is a constructed process that you have to do carefully. You have to engage with that process carefully. It evolves from the values that we identify with. And then, of course, design gives it physical form. So, you know, if you go back to our independence, Indian design seemed to have a clear identity. Gandhi had defined a set of values for us, the kinds of minimalism and the aesthetic minimalism that came out of it wasn't a stylistic aesthetic minimalism. It came out of the values that this society embraced for those 2 decades. And after that, an institute like this began to understand how that can be extended. So identity comes from the values that you associate with and give manifest in terms of design. And so that, whether it's objects, whether it's textile, whether it's the way you communicate exhibitions, the products we make for our society, that's what constructs our identity and evolves this context for us. So similarly, context is what you make and construct, and design plays a massive role in this process. And how do we do this? To do this effectively, we must go beyond organizing the world around simplistic binaries. We tend to do that as designers too. The rich and the poor, what is private and state-held, what is kacha, pakka. We use these kinds of imagery and metaphors, the binaries that help us organize the world. But design is about synthesizing it. Design is making the binaries disappear, creating different kinds of realities where these confrontations of binaries don't exist. So that is the synthetic quality of design. And that synthetic quality creates intersections, it creates blurrings, it creates new conversations, it creates a new context for our work, new narratives that help us construct these new identities. This is not easy, as the present narratives are truly challenging. We're in a complicated world, but you have to see your role as being about also engaging with this as designers. The narratives that we are dealing with today are, that could be a 1-hour talk in itself, but I think what's fundamentally challenging our forms of engagement as designers today, I believe, is the contemporary rapid geo-economic integration and the simultaneous uneven development, the question of inequity. How do we balance and straddle these acute differences? Inequity, I think, for your generation, I believe, besides climate change and environment, inequity is going to be the biggest challenge. I think this society is going to look at your generation to tell us how we can use design effectively for that. And I think it's going to centrally define, I hope, a lot of your work. Because through this kind of reading, of grappling with these big problems and big issues, I think you begin to read the context that you're working in, and by reading the context that you're going to work in, you can begin to engage with transforming it. And that is where you will find a very productive overlap between what I call your spheres of concerns and your sphere of influence. These are two different things. Frustrations, as you go into life, come from this aspect. We are concerned with climate change, we're concerned with poverty, we're concerned with the economy, but we wake up in the morning and our sphere of influence is very minimal. How do you make this intersect? How do you make your concerns become the spheres of your influence? And that is what will make you effective designers, because the frustration with when these two get separated is so great, and it's palpable within the profession, whether it's architecture or design more generally, and that leads to cynicism. So don't let that happen. Make your concerns intersect with what you can actually influence. And I think that will create much broader ambitions. It'll create nuanced thinking of problems. And I think then our effect as designers can be far more far-reaching, progressive in terms of its social impact, beyond the immediate sites of our projects. And this really, I hope, will be your aspiration. One of the biggest challenges for your generation is going to be social media. And I say that both it's going to be very positive, but there are many challenges that you should be aware of. The ability of technology to shrink the globe has been something we've celebrated. But what it has done without us realizing is that it has expanded the locality in a much more nuanced way, and it has made our influence actually on the locality less. We know often much more about what's happening politically around the world. We don't know what's happening in the neighborhoods that we live adjacent to. So how you create this balance between the locality of your operation and global thinking. I mean, there are many cliches around the global and the local, but I think in this moment with social media, the locality, unfortunately, is receding much more in our imagination. So be cautious about that. So while the Earth, this planet we live on, as Buckminster Fuller called it, spaceship Earth, is your ultimate client, how do you imagine the implications at all these scales, piece by piece, to make your work effective at the local level is equally important. So don't lose sight of that. There are many such inversions that are happening in our world today, and these you must become aware of, discuss, grapple with. For example, look at this latest report that came out on climate change. It gives us, as a planet, 10 years to mitigate the 2 degrees that would completely destroy our future. So the future has become very precise. It's become very predictable. 20 years ago, the future we speculated about. Now, when you talk about financial markets and you talk about climate change, just between those 2 brackets, you have a very precise future that we are hurtling towards. And the past has become fluid. Witness the way everyone reconfigures the past. The past has become fluid. 20 years ago, the past was solid and the future was fluid. There's a complete inversion. And so how do you operate in these conditions? You must become aware of them. They have huge implications on design, because to operate in the fluidity of the past and the preciseness of the future can actually propel you in very fantastic ways, but it can also be confusing because you don't know what legacy you're building, because the past is being continuously reinterpreted. So these are the kinds of challenges that you must become acutely aware of. And here the question of patronage becomes critical for you as designers. They say success lies in figuring out what you want to do, who you are, what you are passionate about, and then finding someone to pay for it, right? So patronage is critical. But finding the right patronage is equally important. In today's world, with social media, all the technology that we have, you have to leverage it, and you can actually make your own desired forms of patronage. You can construct patronage. You can actually get support for an idea through crowdsourcing. You can construct a constituency of support through a good idea that you have. So don't think of the future only as getting a job or setting up a design firm and waiting for a client to knock on your door, but also as advocates, as activists who construct these conditions to make design instrumental in transformation, in making a better world. And you do this by seeking out the problem and then instrumentalizing design to make that change. But also understanding the world and the field of design is as much a contribution as changing the world through design. Instruments of advocacy, be it research, teaching, books, exhibitions, beautiful and effective graphics that communicate more powerfully than has ever been done before. And I think those are tools of advocacy that you contribute a great deal to through design. But finally, design is a powerful tool for change making. Finally, if we don't have agency or find ways to have agency, we break down as a profession. And so you have to find ways that you can make design instrumental and have agency. Otherwise, there's no point in defining these as professions. But let me be clear. One should seek your own path in today's world. There's no one way. The pluralism of possibilities is what makes this an exciting time. You have to see your own path, but beware, there are many ways ahead. So also choose carefully and as correctly as you can. The architect Charles Correa would often quote a friend, an architect friend from Ahmedabad, I think it's the architect Talati, but I'm not sure, who when leaving Le Corbusier's studio in Paris was asked by the master architect what he would do when he returned to India. And this young architect looked to Corbusier, he was enthusiastic, and he answered, "Well, sir, I don't really know, but I think I'll find a job in Bombay." Corbusier, it seems, looked at him and said, "Be careful, huh? Whenever you get to the station, there's always a train leaving. Don't jump on it just because it's leaving. Make sure it's your train. Make sure it's your train." It's such a fantastic piece of advice. Charles Correa went on to say, it's not so much the talent one possesses, but the nourishment one gets that will make one grow. And that nourishment comes only from the work you're doing. So if your first job is on a train that's going in the wrong direction, it doesn't really matter if you make a lot of money, if you have an easy life. The truth is you're going in the wrong direction. If your talent doesn't get that nourishment it needs, it will dry up and atrophy. Watch out for that. This is why decades later, in 2 or 3 decades, when you guys get together, when you have reunions, you will find the most interesting work and often the most relevant work is being done not only by your classmates because they had the highest marks or had the best portfolios when you graduated, but those who found ways to address the right issues, because that's the only way you'll grow. And so beware of that. Think about that. The right train for each of us is different. To find the right train, you must focus on nourishing your talent, but also be conscious of how you cultivate your temperament to make that talent grow. Talent a lot of us are born with, and if you're rightly nurtured, it grows. That's why you guys are all here at the National Institute of Design. Temperament we have to nourish and cultivate. The most successful people in life, I believe, are the ones who have the self-realization about the power of their talent as well as their temperament, because the two are incredibly tightly linked. And the glue for all of this is perseverance. That perseverance is what finally takes us to our destination. Naturally, there are ups and downs. We sometimes extend our talent beyond our temperament, take great risks on challenges, and vice versa. But keep persevering, as this balance is never perfect. Just be aware and conscious that these two, together with the glue of perseverance, is what will hold you in great stead in the future. Lastly, you must recognize your citizens first and then designers. Citizens of the globe, but also your locality. I mentioned the context and constructing the context, and now let's look at the context of our work, India, which will be the site of the operation, I hope, of many of you. In India, something rather amazing is happening. In India, we are told by 2030, it's going to become 40% urban. Cities will account for 70% of the new jobs created. 2030 and by 2030 and account for 70% of the GDP. While this is broadly true, it's not a very nuanced reading. These sorts of readings will make you all stay in big cities, and that will be a big mistake. In fact, India will be 40% urban for only 6 months of the year, and it will be 60% urban for the other 6 months of the year. So we'll have 300 million people in the next 3 decades who will be in a state of flux. This is a huge design challenge. This is going to be the central challenge for your generation. All the way from the kinds of houses we design, to the kinds of products, to the way we communicate these challenges. How do we make these mobile lives that are in a state of flux decent, comfortable, aesthetically pleasurable? This is a transitionary condition that India is going to go through in the next 3 decades, and design is going to have to be one of the major drivers. What you must recognize is that India's urbanization has been shaped by the proximity of large, medium, and small nodes of concentrated population to a historically entrenched agrarian territory with an already fairly high population density. That's why we see the continuum as we drive into the countryside. The presence of the railway network, inexpensive transportation facilities have created an interconnected urban agrarian field where labor has fluidly moved between settlements without the explicit consciousness of the distinct categories of the urban and the rural. This condition really differentiates India's process of urbanization from predominantly Western models of urbanization, which we tend to use as a lens to look at this. Thus, urbanization in India has to be understood through patterns derived from observation of emerging conditions unique to settlements within this urban agrarian field. Or in other words, the continuum, physical, cultural, economic, social, between the urban and rural is actually in India completely difficult to differentiate or map in any emergent condition. Thus, this is a condition of intense flux and movement that is continuously defining and redefining the urban and rural simultaneously. So to put this in a simple way, the Census of India says that we have about 7,528 towns. And this is based on some criteria they have, which is 3 criteria. One is a criteria of density, one is about population size of 5,000 people, and one is a very weird criteria of 75% of the male population being in agricultural or non-agricultural employment. But if you just take the size of 5 to 10,000 people, which is what you need for social facilities, institutions, India has really 32,000 towns, not 7,000 towns. There's some 26,000 settlements that don't become defined as towns, but sometimes have over 100,000 people, 150,000 people. These are being governed as villages, so they don't get the infrastructure, they don't get the benefit of any of this. These are places which I believe your future challenges, your clients and your patrons and lie. These are the places that design must transform. Gandhi was right when he said, India lives in its villages. If he were alive today, I'm confident he would have said that the real India lives in those 30,000 towns. These are the places you must seek and must transform. These are the places where aspirations are mind-bogglingly high, places where people want to succeed, and these are places where smart agents of transformation don't even need the rubric of smart cities. They just need good transformative design. So go out and seek these places. While they'll be lucky to get you, you will be even luckier to get their patronage. That's how you will grow. That's how you will be nourished. That's how you'll become great designers. That's how you'll transform society. And the last thing I want to say is that in all these ambitions, the one thing you must never forget, however lofty your ambitions, is that you must be empathetic and place the human and all living beings at the center of your imagination. This wonderful landscape, the birds that chirp here and make this atmosphere mind-boggling, that should be your chief concern. Finally, you must design for living beings, and you must never lose your humanity. Once lost, that is not something design can regain for you. That's the deepest value you must bring to this planet through your good design work. All the very best, congratulations, and may the force be with you.